Archives are about space and about time. There is always a hidden something that we have to look for very carefully.
A hidden concept, a hidden document, and a hidden narrative. How can we preserve an archive?
And how can we preserve documents in an archive? Archives are very important as a protest against forgetting.
If we want to anticipate the future, the lessons of history as a discipline are central to the art of archiving.
The future is sometimes invented with fragments from the past.
First of all, thank you so very much for having accepted our invitation to participate in this series. I'm really excited, about our conversation today. It could be interesting if you could tell us a bit, how you got interested in Islamic art. So,
good. Anyway, very nice. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's an honor and a pleasure too. It's a very rare occasion, and I think I'm absolutely happy to present a little bit of the Museum of Islamic Art, which indeed is it's in fact the only museum of Islamic art only devoted to Islamic art in the whole world. So, we have, of course, museums or departments of Islamic art everywhere, London, Berlin, New York. Well, there is Malaysia. They have a Museum of Islamic Art as well, I have to confess, yeah. And it also is different because there are also other museums of Islamic art, like in Cairo, but these are more concerned with the Egyptian history. So our museum is really taking the global approach. We have everything, well, most of it, from Spain in the west to China in the east. Yeah. Yes, anyway, my name is Julia, Dr. Julia, as they say here in Qatar, Dr. Julia Gonnella. I'm originally from Germany, and I got interested probably on my first travels to the Middle East, actually. I went as a student, or even before, I went to Morocco and Turkey and places like this. So I got interested in this, and then I started learning Arabic, and I was in London. I studied Islamic art and archaeology in London, and then I later on added history and social anthropology. So in fact, I'm a little bit of everything. Nothing's, completely. Yeah, that's how I started. And after this, I worked a long time as a freelance. I worked a long time as an archaeologist. I worked, in fact, with my husband together, who is also an archaeologist. We worked for many, many years in Syria, especially in Aleppo, on the citadel of Aleppo. We were carrying out excavations. So he was for the ancient Near East, and I was for the Islamic period. So this is my field actually is Syria, really. Syria, a little bit of Turkey. We worked a little bit in Spain, or I worked, we worked actually again in Spain together on another project later on when I was in Berlin, in the Berlin Museum on the Alhambra. As you know, the Berlin Museum has a cupola of the Alhambra, and we digitized it, and we went to Granada and digitized the tower where it came from, so we can now at least put it together virtually. So that's my Spanish connection. Otherwise, I'm not a very good expert on Spanish Islamic art. Yeah, and so then I worked in Berlin Museum for quite a while, and as a curator, and now I'm specialized on archaeology, archaeological artifacts, but also paintings. In Berlin, there is a nice collection of Indian paintings. In fact, my very first internship was in the Victoria and Albert Museum in the Indian collection. So again, I do lots of different things, and I'm here in Doha since 4.5 years. That's very nice. It's a very challenging task, very nice task. I'm here basically because, in fact, we're going to change the museum. We're doing a big rehang of the museum. The museum was opened 12 years ago. And when it was opened, I don't know whether you ever visited.
Unfortunately, I haven't. It's one of my musts, but
yes.
Because
Yes, I think for architect lovers, I think it's a must.
yeah,
And you know, it's not only it's so beautiful to look at as a visitor, it's actually beautiful to work here. And it reflects on all the people here. So people come here, they love working here because it's just the atmosphere. I was trying to change the laptop actually, but it doesn't work with the light, because I'm now looking at this window with the mashrabiyah and, you know, so looking over the port. It's extremely beautiful.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean, and I think, you know, we all the time we speak about global, but, you know, I think you made a very interesting point there, because really Islamic art is pretty global, because it takes, you know, bits and pieces of all around Asia and Europe and et cetera, et cetera. And I think probably that's a very interesting thing about the museum too, because you were saying you were studying, or you were related to Indian painting, and at the same time to the Alhambra, etc. And I think, you know, this kind of globalization to a certain extent, early globalization of the Islamic art, I think it's a very interesting point that I suppose is reflected in the museum too, because you have lots of different material, don't you? I mean, you have from tapestry. I mean, I had a look, and I had the impression you had beautiful samples of that, and a number of lots of different different works. I mean, artworks, pieces, etc. And I think that's very exciting too. I don't know what you could tell us about that.
Yeah, well, it's a very crucial point you actually touch upon, because globalization, that's a key question for people working in Islamic art. What, you know, globalization, yes, but what is the binding part of it at the same time? So what is the similarity between, you know, maybe a design in the Alhambra in Granada, and if you go to Uzbekistan and have the Registan in Samarkand? Because it's interesting, there's a lot of globalism, yes, and there was no you know, sort of in the medieval world, I mean, people would travel with boats, with horses, with camel, with caravans. Trade was overriding, but at this, you know, so yes, they brought, you know, influences from one side to the others. At the same time, there is something which unites it. So that's really interesting to find a balance on this, to be honest, because I think the religion, although of course we know in the Middle East not only Muslims, I mean that's very clear, all sorts of other religions, but you see it's still, there seems to be like a unified thing at the same time, you know, and you can read in the ancient texts when you know, if you have Ibn Battuta, I mean, he comes and arrives in Oman port, immediately feels totally comfortable. No, I mean, he goes to the mosque, speaks with the people, and gets in touch. So that's there is a unifying in the whole globalization. There's something unifying at the same time. Yeah, yes, and for the objects, of course. And you see, this is the interesting thing about actually about our rehang is. Because when they opened it, it was like a piece of art. Of course, the whole museum is a piece of art. The architecture is a piece of art. And when they put the objects in the showcases, the most expensive showcases, most beautiful showcases, and you know, you have like a glass and it says glass. Yeah, or you have a bowl and it says bowl, but there was really no history. It was a very aesthetic approach. And then they realized very quickly that people wanted to have more information about the history and the background. And so we now have a whole rehang, which it's 2 floors. And the first floor is more about the beginnings of Islam. We keep the showcases and the beauty and everything. And the second one is a journey, actually. So there's a journey going from the Mediterranean, you know, it's sort of North Africa, Arab lands, Iran, South Asia. And we included first time now Southeast Asia, actually, which is really nice. And China, and we have, you know, the trade is one of the really key topics in the Mediterranean. Yeah, the trade between the different ports and the influence and the movement of objects, but also, of course, ideas. No, and then the same thing we have for the other side in the Indian Ocean, because the Indian Ocean really connected especially here in Qatar. When you're here in Qatar, in fact, the East more important than the West, because there are much closer relationships with India, with Africa, and then to Southeast Asia. And not only today, you see, this is so interesting. Today, Doha is a global city, but also before, this connection is extremely important.
Yeah, that's why I was mentioning this kind of a globalization of la lettre, because of course there was a lot of commerce, and you said the exchange of ideas that went from one port to another, and this is something in the West sometimes we tend to forget, and I think it's interesting to remind and remember that. And sorry, I interrupted you. And so, well, this sounds fabulous, to have this kind of second floor with a journey, because I think it's interesting for local people, because sometimes, I mean, people going to the museum don't know the history so well anywhere in the world. And then I think it's very exciting for visitors too, because you can contextualize, the importance of Qatar, not only today, as you were mentioning, before, but before, in the old days.
Yes, it was very important to take to start when you look. I mean, if you do a rehang, I mean, you have to look for the audience, and our audience really, I mean, we're based in Qatar, so really everything we did is we tried from this perspective for our audience here. This is number one, and our audience very diverse. I mean, we have Qatari audience, but we have so many expats and from everywhere in the world, and of course a lot of workers from India and Philippines and things like this. But basically, if you want to go out for dinner, you can have everything. We have Spanish people also working in our team, so I mean, everything is here. So that was important. But then the tourism is another very crucial point in Qatar they work on. And before Corona, we had cruise ships. They came with the ships mainly. We had them very regularly. And sometimes we had something like 7,000 visitors per day, which, in the year before Corona, we had 500,000 visitors and very many tourists. And that is more than any museum in Berlin, except for the museum island. So it's a lot.
It's a lot.
And of course, as a director, you always say, oh, this is, it's because of you, but actually it's not only because of you. Of course, the reality is different. I mean, but you see, but they work here. And now next year, of course, we have the World Cup, as you should be aware. And so our whole mindset is to finish our rehang, to open right away for this World Cup. And not only we, so everything, the roads, the other museums. So you should come. It's a very interesting place.
Yeah, well, as I said, it's a must, and I've heard so much about Doha that at this point, that's why I was so excited, to hear more about the museum, because I know the place is very interesting. Maybe Julia, you could tell us a bit more about the collection of the museum itself, which kind of things you and maybe how the collection
came together.
With that.
Yeah. So the collection, in fact, this whole museum is part of a larger vision of the then Qatari Emir. Is now the father of the present Emir. So His Highness, the Father Emir, we say today. And he was the one who, in fact, changed Qatar. I mean, from a rather small to now a sort of very global city. And one part was the very, very serious part is, of course, you don't have oil and gas anymore, no? And so how will you proceed for the future? And it was very important to incorporate culture education in this new strategy. And really everything we do here is also for the next generation. And that's very different to many places in Europe, I have to say, because you have a lot of children, youngsters, teenagers, young people coming. So when they started, I mean, it was his idea to have a whole series of museums. And the Museum of Islamic Art, the first one, and that is also very clear, because, you might be, and this is just, it's obvious. And so he invited EMPI. In fact, there were other choices in the beginning. There's a big story about this, how it happened, and then they chose him. And at the same time, he had a consultant, Sheikh Saud Ibn Thani, who was from the same family, who was appointed by him as the person who actually collects the objects, not only for Emea, but also for the other collections. You know, Qatar has one of the biggest photographic collections in the world,
Yeah, that's what
for example.
I'm going to ask you about later, because I think that's fascinating too. So go ahead.
Yeah, and we did an exhibition just now on Sheikh Saud on his memory, actually. So he bought many things on the art market. I mean, Qatar, like, you know, is a late comer in comparison to Europe, of course, because the Europeans had collected before, as you know, I mean, in different times. So Qatar, Sheikh Saud had an extremely good eye, and he collected, and he had good advisors at the same time. And really the idea was to be a global museum. As I said, it's not like in Turkey, there also is a Turkey Islam as a learning museum. So it's on the Ottomans, no, or on Turkey basically. While here, we have. It was very important to have objects really from the whole span of the Islamic world, and there are still some strengths. For example, we are very good in early Qurans. That's something, of course, people are super interested here. We have a very good choice of manuscripts, Quran manuscripts. Then another, we have actually a very strong section on carpets. We have very good. It's one of the best collections in the world, actually. It's very good. And then we have everything. We have ceramics, we have metalwork, we have, I mean, you name it. We have leather, we have, ivory, and so on, so on. So it's basically it's everything. But the other thing which they are here very interested is, of course, in the history of sciences. So we have a very large collection on astrolabes, for example, or also scientific literature.
Well, that's really fascinating, you know, because I mean, it's like a museum. I was having a look, you know, at the different items, and you know, I was really fascinated by the carpets, the textile collection, because and the books. I mean, a very special collection of books from what I had the access, you know, through the internet. But you know, I think it's interesting, you know, the science, you know, the idea of collecting astrolabes and things related to science, because I think again it's a very good reminder of the roots of Islamic culture. And you know, when visitors go there, they can see, you know, how many things were invented precisely by Islamic culture. So I think, you know, the idea of showing different aspects is very very interesting for the visitors. No doubt, you know, they are very excited to visit Doha and the museum. Well, you were telling us about the manuscripts, you know, and maybe we could get a bit more into the archive of the museum, because I suppose the archive of the museum is interesting. And how do you perceive the archive? Would you consider manuscripts as part of the collection, as part of the archive? Because, you know, I think
yes,
we're discussing a lot the new idea of an archive, of archive it themselves. And, you know, in the case of the Norman Foster collection, we have a great archive, which is of course Foster's drawings, etc. And maybe you could tell us a bit more about that, Julia. How do you consider manuscripts, and what it's the archive of the museum, etc.?
Yeah, well, I think that's a question I had from the beginning when you invited me, because I thought, you know, museum is not exactly an archive, and I discussed with our librarian, who's actually just doing an archive for the library. Museums don't consider themselves as, I mean, not as an archive as you consider it, you know. I mean, it's a collection. It's the manuscripts, of course, part of the collection. I mean, they are objects. We consider them as artworks. Some are more artworks than others, but it's not an archive. The museum has its archive, of course, its own art. I mean, we archive, you know, our former exhibitions. You know, everything we have. Of course, we archive. All the museums do, no? And then at some point, when you archive, because otherwise, you need space for archives, you see, because museums are producing their archives all the time. From my Berlin time, of course, it goes back to the 19th century. So now, you consider whether you open up the archive, of course, for the history of purchases, for example, and here we're not that far, I have to say, and also it's a little bit distributed. Qatar Museums we are part of Qatar. When it was built, Emea was like a lonely museum, solitary, while now it's part of Qatar Museums, and we have one umbrella and led by a CEO, and then we have these different museums or departments, and so for example, purchases would not be with us. All the acquisitions not with us, yes. But of course, that's what we have archived. And then, of course, for the objects, we have a storage, we keep them, we have conservators, they look, temperature is okay, and things like this, yeah.
And maybe you could tell us, you were talking about this big collection of photographs, and I think, like you could tell us a bit more about the collection of photographs. I don't know whether they belong to your museum.
Yeah, no, they don't. You see, this is it. There are some museums already existing and some are in planning. So the Museum of Photography will be part of another museum, which will open, which is not clear yet. So it's us first. And there we have the Mataf Museum, which is the Museum of Modern Arab Art, and they are open. So they have a very strong collection, a very rare collection of Arab modern art, with especially from Egypt and Iraq, actually. So you see, this was also part. It's considered like the Qatar collections in a way, and then you have the different. Then they opened the National Museum, of course. The National Museum has everything to do with Qatar, basically, nature and culture. So this